Hi, everyone. This is Debbie with Common Sense Landlording. Glad to be back here. Last year was kind of a hard year for me, and I know I disappeared a little bit. I ended up having both knees and my right shoulder replaced, so I spent most of 2025 recovering. So I am back, and we'll hopefully be posting more videos as we go. So let's talk about what seems to be a slower market right now. I've noticed some comments in the group and just in general on the internet about how the market seems to be slower. The reality is at this time of year, it seems to slow down. Kids are getting out of school, whether it's grade school, middle school, high school, college, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of people graduating. And it seems like folks are more concerned with getting through that and vacation and finding childcare and things like that than they are about looking for houses right now at this period of time. Unfortunately, we can't control when we have a vacancy, and it's our job, to get the house rented. And that's just kind of the way it is. I've also noticed that the quality of prospects and applicants seems to be a little lower in the past year or so. Used to be fairly simple to get prospects and applicants that met our criteria, and it seems to be a little bit harder right now. So let's talk about this. We're going to break this into the listing part, and then like when it's listed in views and tour request, and then actual people who have been in your house and toured the house. One of the most common solutions that is thrown out very first is just drop the price. And I don't like to do that right off the bat because there are some other things that it could be. And just lowering the rent may or may not solve your problem. So sometimes it's great to drop the rent and sometimes it's not really in the best interest. So if your property is not getting a lot of interest, it's time to figure out what the heck is going on. And that often starts with taking an honest, a brutal look at the condition of your property. So again, I'm not saying that dropping the price is not something you may have to do, but let's talk about this. This gets into knowing your market and knowing your house and what is going on in the particular area that your house is going on, as well as what the market is actually doing. And we've just said it's a little slower right now. And going back to knowing your property, for example, a two-bedroom house is always a little bit harder to rent than a three-bedroom. And we have a couple of two-bedroom houses. When they come up, I kind of dread it because they always do take a little bit longer. And that's just one very specific example that may not match your situation. But just be aware, some properties just take a little bit longer. The other issue is that not every landlord can afford to just drop the price. You may have a mortgage, interest or insurance and taxes are all going up. We all know that. It's just the reality of how it is. So before you list your property, I'm going to tell you, write this out. I'm big on writing things out, pen and paper. Know what your mortgage is if you have one, and write down all of your hard costs and figure out what the very bottom dollar rent is that you can ask. I'm not saying you should list it for that, but you need to know that number. That's part of owning rental property. Know what your bottom dollar is and then figure out what the market is and price your property accordingly. You may be in a situation where you cannot literally afford to drop the rent, and that is okay. And that's one reason I don't just right off the bat say drop the price. Not everybody can do that. You have to be able to financially make everything work if you decide to do that. The other thing that's talked about is softening your rental criteria, and we're going to talk about that. But before we get there, let's take a look at your property. And I haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. So only you can answer these questions. Are your listing photos high quality? I cannot tell you how many photos I've seen, and I'm going, what is this? Is this the living room? Is this what is this? Is this a bedroom? It's just a wall and maybe a corner piece of a window. Make sure your pictures are high quality. I always advocate paying someone to take professional pictures, but if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But not everyone has the gift of photography, and I see it all the time. Ask some friends, ask some, neighbors, ask your family. Look at these pictures and give me an honest opinion, and don't be offended if they are honest and say they're terrible. Honestly ask yourself, is this property clean, fresh, and really fully rent ready? Oftentimes, you've been in the house many times and it's really easy to overlook things. And does the property have good curb appeal? Let me tell you, these prospects and applicants are darn picky. And a lot of them are looking for what I call the McMansion on the McDonald's budget. They are picky, they're hypercritical, and they're not going to rent the house if they feel it's even just a little dirty. I'm also hearing from applicants. I had one couple in particular said, "Oh my gosh, this house is so great. It's clean. It's obviously rent ready," and they rented it. But they said the journey to get there was awful. They had been in a whole lot of houses that were awful. The landlords were asking top dollar for the properties, and the houses were terrible. They were dark, they were dirty. So I'm not saying that's your property, but look at your properties with fresh eyes. Would you pack up and move into that house in the condition it's in right now, today? Ask your friends, family again for an honest opinion, because I've been in houses where the landlord, so it's fine. It wasn't fine. So please, if you're having problems getting interest, look at your pictures and make sure they don't show something that's crazy. I looked at pictures a couple weeks ago on a house and I'm like, there's an obvious hole in the wall there. Your floors, they're hardwood. They look terrible. They need to be redone. I mean, you could see things from the actual pictures, and I'm going, this is crazy. No wonder no one wants to see your house. So don't don't make those mistakes. The other question is, are you listing your property in enough places? And I'm going to tell you, I personally don't like Facebook Marketplace. I've had too many problems there. I don't use that. I use that Folio, who sends it out to a lot of different sites. And I posted in a group, I think last week, talking about how Zillow is the number one search site. Zumper is number two. Apartments.com, lovely.com. Can't remember some of the other ones. I posted them in the group, but I can actually print statistics on those, and I can go back and look at the whole year of everything I've listed, and hundreds of listings or guest cards or requests to see properties come from Zillow and Zumper alone. You may have to go out there and manually put it on some other sites. The more sites it's on, the faster it will rank and the more often it'll come up near the top of the search engine. Also, look at your descriptions on the property. And if you've put, hey, I have a nice 3-bedroom, 1 bath, on a quiet street, that's not enough. I have gotten to where I list every characteristic out, and then I copy and paste that into ChatGPT. I get some fabulous listings. I'm like, holy cow, this place looks like a palace just looking at the listing. So make sure your listing is doing your house justice. And ChatGPT is very simple to use, and it will spit out something that's a lot better than I can personally write. I know that for a fact. So after you've looked at this and you've had a friend or family go through and look at your house, and you determine that, first of all, everything is fine, pricing is not the problem, you might have to think of some things to entice some people with. And some of these you may say, heck no, but here are some things that you can maybe do. In the past, with challenging listings, I have offered 1 month free with a 13-month lease. You may or may not be able to do that. Offer a move-in special with half a month's rent. Do a $100 gift card. If you don't supply appliances, and we only usually will supply a range consistently, it kind of depends on the house. In some areas, you need to provide everything. In some, you can get away with none or just a range. But I've had luck in the past with people who need the appliances and we didn't want to. You can offer to supply them and set up a payment arrangement. Now, that's a whole thing. That's another whole video. I'm not going to get into that, but that's something I could talk about down the road if you all wanted to. And that can get people into the property. They don't have to spend the money up front, and you create a payment plan that makes sense over the course of a 2 or 3 year lease. And there are conditions with that. So this is a very simple, thing here. If you require them to cut the grass, say, we're going to cut your grass for 1 year. Again, this is for houses that you're not able to rent. Some landlords are wanting a month, some want a 6 month, a year, 2 year. I don't know what your preference is. We usually prefer a 2 year lease. On houses that have been harder to rent, we've gone down and only done a 1 year lease. We don't like the turnover. And I'm going to tell you, 99% of the time they stay and they renew because it's a hassle to move. So feel people out, ask them, what's going on. And we'll get to that here. Make some small improvements. And I'm not talking about going out and completely upgrading the house, but maybe, I don't know, if you don't have ceiling fans, maybe put a ceiling fan in the family room. Put some lights on the walkway, something that makes it stand out a little bit, that's not really expensive. You know your house, you know the market, you can kind of figure out what little upgrades you can do that might have some more bang for the buck. So let's switch to their touring and you're not getting applications. And I hate that. I hate when you send a whole bunch of people over, you think the house is great, you've gone through all the things and they won't call you back or they say something non-committal, well, um I'm still looking at houses or they just completely ghost you. You can't get any feedback. So the first thing I always remind them is I'm not the owner. You need to not be the owner when you call. Make up a name, be somebody else. Just follow up and try to get some feedback. I've gotten landlords that have told me, said, they said, house is not rent ready and I can't figure out what's wrong. Somebody tells you your house is not rent ready or ask when it's going to be rent ready, you have a problem. That is your problem. The house is not rent ready. Um, all of these things are red flags, and all of those things are, sorry about that. All of these things are red flags that you need to investigate further and figure out what is going on. Because if you're getting people in the house and you're not getting applications and they're not telling you things like, hey, the bedrooms are too small, things that aren't fixable. Um, the yard is too small. I need a fenced yard. If they're telling you things other than that, then you can't fix those. But all the other things you can absolutely 100% fix. Now, if you decide you need to lower the price, you've determined that the price is the problem or part of the problem. One thing I caution against is constantly lowering your price every week and doing like $25 or $50 increments. If you decide to lower the price, figure out, go into Zillow and figure out what the breakdown is. So I've had houses before where we went in and maybe it was 1325 or 1375. But if you go down to like 1299, you get down below the next search engine criteria. You can go in, you can say I'm looking for something under $1,500. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, or whatever. And if you get just below that, 1499, 1399, something like that, you can open up a whole new group of people looking for a house. And oftentimes you can get a flood of new people coming in without either dropping it too much. I know I said not to drop in small increments, but commit, figure out what the very next best price drop is, commit to that, and then don't just keep dropping your price every 2 or 3 weeks because these applicants and prospects are looking at these houses and they're keeping track of that. And they start to think, what the heck is wrong with this house? And they start not wanting to see it because they're worried you just keep dropping the price or something wrong with it. So again, know your market, know your property, know your numbers. Those are the key things before you decide to do any kind of fiddling with anything, whether it's the rent, your criteria, or whatever. Also be aware of fatal flaws. You may not even be aware you have a fatal flaw in the house. A fatal flaw is something that is like people just don't want to rent the house because of this one thing. A good example of that is driveways that are straight up. Had a house one time that we were renovating. The driveway was so uphill, they couldn't even get a dumpster up the hill. It was awful. Another example that might or might not occur to people is I had a house one time, a long time ago, had the washing machine in the kitchen. It had the dryer down the hall and by the bathroom, which was weird for me. And it was weird in that price range. We dropped the price a little bit, obviously didn't move the washer and dryer around, and we got into a different segment of people who were coming from places where they didn't have washers and dryers. So this was a whole new upgrade for them because by golly, they had a washer and a dryer. And we rented that house fairly quickly once we made that determination. So it could be anything. It could be, a yard in a backyard that's got too many trees and things in it. Who knows? It's fatal flaws though are problematic and can stop you from renting a house and can make you really have to drop your price. They can be a real deal killer for me. I wouldn't buy a house with what I consider to be a fatal flaw. So let's talk about softening your rental criteria. And it can often seem like a great idea to just, let's just loosen things up a little bit. We'll lower everything, we'll get somebody. But this can be a very mixed bag. Always remember that your goal is not to find a warm live body with a heartbeat to put in the house. Your goal should always be to find the very best tenant possible. I have tenants that are a nightmare that I've had for years and years and years, way before I ever had my credit criteria in place. They're a nightmare. They're still here and they are still driving me crazy. On the other hand, I have the wonderful tenants that I've put in that met my criteria. I don't hear from them. They pay the rent, they take care of the property, they are awesome. And that's what we are looking for. Now, before you do any of the things that I suggest, remember, I don't know who's going to see this video. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. We are lucky. We can charge extra rent. We can charge extra security deposits. We can charge move-ins. We can charge security deposits. That's not the case in many areas. So we're very fortunate here. So know the laws before you make any decisions about anything that I'm talking about in this video. So again, if you lower your criteria, what I would say to you is ask this question: how do I mitigate my risk? You can get first and last month's rent. You can get an extra deposit or a cosigner. Remember, cosigners have to be awesome in order for them to qualify to not only pay for their own living situation, but to pay for this person's living situation. So I'm not going to get into that. This is another whole video as well, but don't just pick anybody to be the cosigner. They're useless otherwise. So the one thing I will never, ever, ever, ever soften is the income requirement. They have to have income of 3 times the rent. If you get any lower than that, you're going to have problems. Also, watch your debt to income ratio. I am seeing a lot of people with massive student loans, 100,000 plus. I just had a guy, he was so close on the income of 3 times the rent, he just qualified. And then you threw in a little over $100,000 in student loans. And what he told me is that his payment was a little over $600 a month. And when I started adding up all of his bills, he had a car payment, he had insurance, without groceries, without gas, any of that stuff, just the rent, just his student loans, and his car payment and his insurance. And he had some credit card bills as well. Again, I qualify on gross, but I always look at the net. He didn't have enough net income coming in to even cover those bills. And that was no gas for his car. That was no groceries. That was nothing else. So watch that very carefully. I don't drop that. So after you go through all of this, and hopefully you find something wrong. Hopefully you find something fixable, because that's easy. You fix it, you move on, you get your house rented. Unfortunately, if you can't find anything wrong, everything looks right, it seems to be appropriately priced and everything, sometimes it just takes a little longer. It's not going to last forever. It's just not. We're in that time of year when everybody's getting out of school again, summer's starting, and things will pick up. They really will. Sometimes you have to make the decision. Do I want to really cut this? Do I want to just put somebody in there, or do I want to just sit for a little while? I'm not talking forever, because I know it costs money to have a house sit. Do I want to, what do I want to do? Do I want the best possible tenant? Do I want to wait this out, or do I want to make some changes? And only you can answer that question. Sometimes there's not an easy answer. Sometimes you do what's best for you in your financial situation, and that is okay. So hopefully this was helpful. Put some feedback or any questions in the comments, and good luck on getting your house rented. I hope it rents quickly and that it doesn't sit for much longer.